The easiest way to discover the truth about someone's heart is to give them a reason to believe you have nothing to offer. Ethan Brooks learned that lesson the hard way, standing alone in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, while the glittering skyline stretched endlessly before him like a kingdom that somehow felt completely empty. At 32 years old, Ethan had built one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America, transforming a small startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire that dominated headlines, business magazines, and financial news every week. His schedule was packed with investor meetings, charity galas, television interviews, and luxury vacations he barely remembered taking. His garage held exotic cars worth more than most families would earn in several lifetimes. His private jet waited whenever he wanted to disappear for a weekend. Yet none of those things followed him into the silence that filled his home every night. His phone buzzed across the marble kitchen island. Another message from someone asking if he was available for dinner. Another carefully crafted compliment. Another invitation that somehow always ended with conversations about expensive trips, exclusive clubs, or luxury shopping. Ethan locked the screen without replying. He had stopped believing in coincidence a long time ago. Everyone seemed fascinated by his success before they ever became interested in the man behind it. The breaking point had come only 3 weeks earlier, when he accidentally overheard his fiancée laughing with one of her closest friends. She admitted she had never imagined falling in love with Ethan, only with the extraordinary life that came with marrying him. Hearing those words had felt strangely calm rather than dramatic. There had been no shouting, no scene, no desperate attempt to save the relationship. He quietly ended the engagement the next morning and walked away, wondering if real love still existed for someone whose name appeared on billionaire lists. That question refused to leave his mind. It followed him through board meetings, charity events, and every handshake that suddenly felt rehearsed. One Friday evening, his oldest friend, Mason Carter, watched Ethan stare blankly at a crowded rooftop party where dozens of beautiful women competed for his attention without realizing how little any of it meant anymore. Mason stepped beside him and spoke softly. "You're looking for honesty in places where everyone already knows your net worth." Ethan gave a tired smile. "Then where exactly am I supposed to find it?" Mason looked directly at him before answering with an idea so ridiculous it almost sounded impossible. "Let them meet someone who has absolutely nothing. Join a blind dating service as a homeless man. Don't tell anyone who you really are. If someone still chooses to spend time with you, maybe that's the first honest answer you've received in years." Ethan laughed at first, but the smile slowly disappeared. For the first time since his engagement ended, he wasn't thinking about what he could buy. He was thinking about what he might finally discover. Ethan barely slept that weekend. Mason's words echoed through his mind long after the party ended, refusing to fade no matter how many emails he answered or meetings he attended. By Monday morning, he found himself sitting in a private conference room at company headquarters, surrounded by executives discussing quarterly projections worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Charts filled the enormous screen. Analysts debated market trends. Investors joined through video calls from California, London, and Singapore. Normally, Ethan would have led every discussion with confidence, but this time, his thoughts wandered somewhere far away from stock prices and expansion plans. During a short break, he quietly asked his chief operating officer to handle executive responsibilities for the next several weeks. The announcement surprised everyone in the room. Ethan had never voluntarily stepped away from the company for more than a long weekend. Rumors immediately began spreading that he was negotiating another acquisition or preparing an international expansion. No one guessed the truth because the truth sounded too unbelievable. That afternoon, Mason arrived carrying several shopping bags and a folder filled with information about a popular blind dating service that matched strangers based on personality questionnaires rather than social status. Ethan studied the application forms carefully before writing a completely different version of himself. His occupation became unemployed. His residence became a temporary shelter in Brooklyn. His annual income became $0. His emergency contact listed only Mason using a prepaid phone number. Looking at the paperwork felt strangely unsettling. For the first time in years, every advantage connected to his name had disappeared with a few lines of ink. The next step was even more uncomfortable. Mason drove him across the city to meet a professional makeup artist who usually worked on independent films. Within 2 hours, Ethan's expensive haircut had vanished beneath uneven hair extensions. His neatly trimmed beard became rough and neglected. Light makeup added tired shadows beneath his eyes, while inexpensive clothing replaced the tailored suits that usually cost several $1,000s each. Faded jeans, worn sneakers, an oversized jacket, and an old backpack completed the transformation. When the artist handed him a cracked mirror, Ethan stared silently for several seconds. The confident billionaire who appeared on magazine covers had completely disappeared. Even his own reflection felt unfamiliar. Mason smiled with quiet satisfaction. "If I did not know you for 20 years, I would walk past you without looking twice." Ethan forced a nervous laugh before stepping outside onto a busy Manhattan sidewalk. The reaction came almost immediately. Hundreds of people passed within a few feet of him. None recognized one of the most photographed entrepreneurs in the country. Some glanced away the moment they noticed his appearance. Others avoided eye contact altogether. A security guard outside an office building politely asked him to keep moving because employees were arriving for work. Ethan nodded without argument and continued walking. Every step felt like entering a completely different world, one where wealth, influence, and reputation no longer existed, leaving only a stranger searching for something money had never been able to buy. The first official blind date was scheduled for Wednesday evening inside a quiet coffee shop on the Upper West Side, a place known for bringing strangers together instead of impressing them with luxury. Ethan arrived 20 minutes early, carrying his worn backpack over one shoulder while pretending to study the menu posted near the entrance. The dating service had instructed both participants to wear simple name tags instead of exchanging photographs beforehand, hoping personality would matter more than appearance. Ethan looked at the handwritten tag pinned to his jacket. It simply read, "Daniel." The fake name felt strangely natural now. Several customers glanced toward him before quickly looking away. A young couple entered the shop together, smiling and laughing, but instinctively chose a table on the opposite side of the room. Ethan noticed the tiny changes in people's expressions the moment they looked at his clothes. Some faces tightened with caution. Others showed quiet discomfort. Nobody smiled first. Exactly at 6 o'clock, a woman named Brittany walked through the front door. She looked around the room until her eyes landed on Ethan. For a brief second, she hesitated, clearly expecting someone else. She slowly approached the table while forcing a polite smile that never reached her eyes. After introducing herself, she sat down but never removed her designer handbag from her shoulder, almost as if she planned to leave at any moment. Ethan tried to begin with ordinary conversation, asking about her work, her hobbies, and the places she enjoyed visiting around New York City. Brittany answered politely, but kept glancing toward the entrance every few seconds. Finally, she asked the question Ethan had expected from the beginning. "So, what exactly do you do for work?" Ethan calmly explained that he was searching for stable employment after several difficult months. He admitted he had been staying at a shelter while trying to rebuild his life. Silence settled over the table. Brittany nodded slowly before checking her phone. Less than 5 minutes later, she apologized, saying an unexpected work emergency had come up. She wished him good luck and walked away without ordering a drink. Ethan watched her disappear through the glass door before quietly lowering his eyes toward the untouched menu. He felt disappointed, but not surprised. The second blind date happened 2 days later. This woman, Lauren, laughed politely when they first met, but her interest faded almost immediately after learning about Ethan's situation. She spent more time scrolling through social media than listening to him speak. Before ending the conversation, she gently suggested that he should focus on improving his financial stability before looking for a serious relationship. Ethan thanked her sincerely because he knew she believed she was offering practical advice. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, he wondered whether anyone would ever look beyond the worn jacket, the old backpack, and the story they assumed they already understood. Across the street, unnoticed by Ethan, Mason sat inside a parked car, observing everything from a distance. He had expected rejection, but even he had not realized how quickly people formed opinions before giving someone a genuine chance to be known. Over the next 2 weeks, the experiment became emotionally exhausting in ways Ethan had never imagined. Every blind date revealed another quiet lesson about how quickly people judged appearances before discovering character. Some women remained polite from beginning to end, but their smiles faded the moment the conversation turned toward his uncertain future. Others asked practical questions that slowly transformed into silent calculations. Did he own a car? No. Did he have a stable apartment? Not yet. Did he have long-term career plans? He hoped to rebuild one day. Each answer seemed to close another invisible door. Ethan never blamed them for wanting security. What hurt was realizing that very few people stayed long enough to discover who he really was beneath the worn jacket and tired eyes. One rainy afternoon, he met a woman named Chloe at a neighborhood diner in Queens. She greeted him warmly at first, and even laughed at one of his stories about getting lost while exploring Central Park. For a brief moment, Ethan wondered if this meeting might be different. Then the waitress accidentally mentioned that the lunch special was $20. Chloe looked toward Ethan with quiet expectation. Without hesitation, he admitted he could only afford coffee that afternoon. Her expression changed almost instantly. She politely excused herself, saying she had forgotten an important appointment, and left before finishing her drink. Ethan remained seated for another 15 minutes, not because he expected her to return, but because he needed time to understand why disappointment felt heavier each day. Another evening brought another introduction, this time with a marketing consultant named Vanessa. She spoke confidently about luxury travel, designer fashion, and ambitious career goals. Ethan listened with genuine interest until she finally asked what he dreamed about most. He smiled softly before answering, "I would like to build a peaceful life with someone who values kindness more than success." Vanessa looked confused. "Kindness does not pay the rent," she replied with a small laugh that sounded more dismissive than playful. Ethan nodded respectfully because he understood her perspective, yet something inside him grew quieter. Walking home through the cool streets of Manhattan later that night, he noticed an elderly man struggling to carry several grocery bags across an intersection. Without thinking, Ethan hurried over and offered to help. The man smiled with sincere gratitude, thanking him repeatedly during the short walk to a nearby apartment building. No cameras captured the moment. No one applauded. Ethan simply wished him a pleasant evening before continuing alone. That small act reminded him that his disguise had never changed the person he truly was. It had only changed how the world responded to him. Meanwhile, Mason watched the dating reports arrive after every meeting. Most participants described Ethan with nearly identical words. Nice but unsuccessful. Kind but unstable. Friendly but not relationship material. Mason closed another report and quietly shook his head. Neither of them realized that the very next name scheduled by the matchmaking service would be someone completely different from anyone Ethan had met before. A woman whose first question would have nothing to do with money, status, or where he lived. The following Saturday afternoon, Ethan arrived at a small independent bookstore in Brooklyn, where the dating service had arranged his next meeting. Unlike the expensive restaurants and fashionable lounges chosen for previous dates, this place felt quiet and welcoming. Shelves filled with well-loved novels stretched from floor to ceiling, while the aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the reading corner near the back. Ethan adjusted the straps of his old backpack and reminded himself not to expect anything different. Experience had taught him that hope often disappeared within the first few minutes. Exactly at 2 o'clock, the front door opened, and a woman stepped inside carrying a canvas tote bag filled with library books. She wore simple jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a light blue sweater that looked practical rather than expensive. Her smile appeared naturally the moment their eyes met. "Daniel?" she asked warmly. Ethan stood and nodded. "Grace." She smiled again. "I hope I'm not late." "You're right on time," Ethan answered. Instead of studying his worn clothes or hesitating after seeing his appearance, Grace immediately suggested they browse the bookstore together before ordering coffee. As they walked between the shelves, she stopped several times to admire classic American novels, recommending a few favorites while asking Ethan what kinds of stories he enjoyed reading. No one had asked him about books during any of his previous dates. They eventually settled into 2 chairs beside the cafe window. Grace ordered a sandwich and 2 coffees before Ethan could say anything. When he quietly admitted that he only planned to buy a small cup of coffee because he needed to save money, Grace simply smiled. "Lunch always tastes better when someone shares it," she replied, while sliding half of her sandwich onto a second plate. There was no pity in her voice, no awkward sympathy, only simple kindness that felt completely genuine. Their conversation flowed effortlessly for nearly an hour. Grace spoke about teaching 4th grade at a public elementary school and how her favorite part of every day was watching shy students slowly gain confidence. Ethan listened carefully, fascinated by the passion in her voice. When she asked about his own situation, he told the same story he had shared with everyone else. He explained that life had become difficult, that he was searching for steady work, and that he hoped to rebuild his future one step at a time. Grace did not interrupt. She did not offer unwanted advice. She simply nodded and said, "Everyone deserves another chance, especially good people who keep trying." Those words lingered in Ethan's mind long after she finished speaking. As they prepared to leave, rain suddenly began falling outside. Without hesitation, Grace opened her umbrella and laughed softly. "Looks like we are walking together for a few blocks." They shared the narrow sidewalk while talking about childhood memories, favorite parks, and the best pizza slices in New York City. Before saying goodbye, Grace reached into her tote bag and handed Ethan a gently used novel. "I think you will enjoy this one," she said. "You can give it back whenever we meet again." Ethan accepted the book carefully, watching her disappear into the rainy afternoon with an unfamiliar feeling growing quietly inside his heart. For the first time since beginning the experiment, he found himself hoping there really would be another meeting. Over the next several days, Ethan found himself looking forward to Grace's messages more than any business report waiting inside his private inbox. She never texted to ask about money, never hinted at expensive restaurants, and never questioned why his life seemed so uncertain. Instead, she asked whether he had finished the novel she had lent him, whether he had discovered a new coffee shop worth visiting, and whether he was sleeping well. Their conversations felt effortless because they were built on curiosity instead of expectation. Still, Ethan knew the experiment was not complete. If Grace truly accepted him for who she believed he was, then her kindness would remain even when life became more difficult. Although the idea made him uncomfortable, he decided to create one final test. During their next meeting at a neighborhood park, Ethan appeared more discouraged than usual. He quietly explained that the temporary warehouse job he had recently hoped to secure had fallen through, and that the shelter where he had been staying was reducing available beds because of overcrowding. None of those details placed Grace in danger or asked her for financial help. But together, they painted the picture of a man facing another setback. Ethan watched her expression carefully, expecting disappointment or hesitation. Instead, Grace sat silently for a moment before speaking in the calm voice he had already begun to admire. "You have had a difficult season," she said. "But difficult seasons do not last forever." Ethan forced a small smile. "Most people would probably tell me to give up." Grace shook her head immediately. "No, they would tell you to keep moving if they truly cared." The following afternoon, Grace invited Ethan to help with a weekend volunteer event organized by her elementary school. Parents, teachers, and local residents gathered to organize donated books and classroom supplies for children whose families could not easily afford them. Ethan spent hours carrying boxes, assembling shelves, and helping younger students choose books to take home. Nobody there knew he owned one of the largest technology companies in the country. They simply thanked him for lending a hand. Grace watched quietly as Ethan knelt beside one nervous little boy who could not decide between two adventure novels. Rather than choosing for him, Ethan patiently listened while the child described both stories before encouraging him to pick the one that made him most excited to read. Grace smiled from across the room because kindness like that could not be rehearsed. Later, while everyone shared homemade cookies and lemonade, one of Grace's co-workers gently asked how the two of them had met. Grace answered with complete confidence, "We met through a blind date, and I'm really glad we did." There was no embarrassment in her voice, despite Ethan's worn clothes and uncertain circumstances. As the sun began to set, they slowly walked toward the subway entrance together. Grace handed Ethan a paper bag filled with leftover cookies for later and reminded him not to skip dinner. Ethan accepted the small gift with genuine gratitude, but inside his heart, another emotion had begun to grow. For the first time since starting this journey, he no longer wondered whether someone could love a man without wealth. Instead, he found himself wondering how much longer he could hide the truth from the one person who had already seen the best part of him without ever knowing his real name. A week later, the matchmaking company announced a special reunion event for everyone who had participated in the blind dating program during the past month. The invitation promised an elegant evening where participants could reconnect, share their experiences, and, if they wished, choose whether to continue building a relationship with someone they had met. Grace smiled when she received the invitation and immediately asked Ethan if he planned to attend. Ethan paused before answering because he knew this gathering would become the turning point he had been preparing for since the experiment began. "Yes," he replied softly. "I think I need to be there." Grace noticed the seriousness in his voice, but did not press him for an explanation. "Then I will be there too," she answered with a warm smile. During the days leading up to the event, several of the women Ethan had previously met exchanged messages through the dating application's group chat. Some joked about the unusual participants they had encountered, while others laughed about the man who had arrived wearing worn clothes and carrying an old backpack. Ethan quietly read the conversations without responding. None of the comments were openly cruel, but they reminded him how quickly appearances shaped first impressions. Mason looked over his shoulder before locking the phone screen. "Are you still certain you want to reveal everything?" he asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "Not because I want to embarrass anyone. I only want the truth to finally stand beside the lies people believed about me." The evening finally arrived. Grace stood in front of her apartment mirror, adjusting a simple navy blue dress that she had owned for several years. She considered buying something more expensive, but quickly decided against it. She wanted to arrive as herself, nothing more and nothing less. Meanwhile, Ethan entered his private penthouse for the first time in weeks. Waiting inside was the same wardrobe he had left behind at the beginning of the experiment. One by one, he removed the disguise that had hidden his identity from the world. The rough beard disappeared beneath careful grooming. His uneven hair returned to its familiar style. A perfectly tailored charcoal suit replaced the faded jacket and worn jeans. The old backpack rested quietly beside the closet door. Ethan stared into the mirror, almost surprised to recognize himself again. It felt as though he had lived two completely different lives within a single month. Before leaving, he placed the novel Grace had given him inside the glove compartment of his luxury sedan. It had become the most valuable gift he had received in years because it represented something no amount of money could purchase. At the downtown hotel where the reunion was being held, guests slowly filled the grand ballroom beneath sparkling chandeliers. Grace entered alone, scanning the room for Daniel. Instead, she noticed several women from previous dates talking excitedly near the entrance. One of them recognized her immediately and smiled politely. "Are you waiting for your date too?" she asked. Grace nodded. "Yes. I hope he comes." The woman laughed softly. "I would not get your hopes up. That homeless guy probably found somewhere warmer to spend the evening." Grace simply smiled without replying, because she had already learned something the others never bothered to discover. A person's circumstances could change overnight, but genuine kindness never needed expensive clothes to be seen. Soft conversations filled the ballroom as guests waited for the evening's final announcement. Grace stood quietly near one of the tall windows, occasionally glancing toward the entrance, wondering whether Daniel had simply changed his mind. She refused to believe he would disappear without saying goodbye, yet every passing minute made the silence heavier. Suddenly, the lights dimmed slightly as the event coordinator stepped onto the stage with a welcoming smile. She thanked everyone for participating in the blind dating program and explained that this season had included one extraordinary participant whose story had inspired the entire organizing team. Curious whispers spread across the room. Several guests exchanged confused looks, trying to guess who the coordinator meant. Grace listened carefully, feeling an unexpected sense of anticipation. The coordinator continued. "Tonight we would like to invite one special guest to join us on stage and share why he chose to participate in this experiment." At that exact moment, the ballroom doors slowly opened. Every conversation stopped. A tall man wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit walked confidently into the room. His polished shoes reflected the soft lights above, while several hotel staff members greeted him respectfully by name. For a few seconds, Grace simply admired the stranger, never imagining she had seen those eyes before. Then the man smiled gently. The familiar expression reached her before recognition did. Her heart skipped as memories rushed together. The smile, the calm voice, the patient way he listened. "Daniel," she whispered, almost without realizing it. Across the ballroom, other women stared in complete disbelief. Brittany blinked repeatedly, as if convinced she was misunderstanding what she was seeing. Lauren slowly lowered the glass she had been holding. Vanessa looked from one guest to another, searching for an explanation that nobody could provide. The coordinator raised her hand toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ethan Brooks, founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Technologies." Applause filled the ballroom as Ethan walked onto the stage with calm confidence. Grace remained perfectly still, trying to connect the man she had shared coffee and books with to the billionaire now standing beneath the bright lights. Ethan thanked the audience before speaking. "Several weeks ago, I entered this program under a different name because I wanted to answer one question. If people believed I had nothing, would they still choose to know me?" The room became completely silent. Ethan continued without bitterness. He explained how he had met wonderful people, how some conversations ended quickly after discussing money, and how the experience had taught him more about himself than about anyone else. Then his eyes found Grace, standing quietly near the window. His voice softened. One person never asked how much I earned before asking whether I had eaten. She shared her lunch when she believed I could not afford one. She believed difficult seasons did not define good people. She saw dignity where others only saw struggle. Every guest slowly turned toward Grace. Embarrassed by the unexpected attention, she lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at Ethan. He stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward her. Stopping only a few feet away, he smiled with the same warmth she had first noticed inside the little bookstore. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You treated me with kindness, long before you knew my real name. And that is something I will never forget." Grace looked into Ethan's eyes for a long moment before quietly smiling. "I'm surprised," she admitted honestly, "but I am not disappointed. You are still the same man who listened when I talked about my students, who carried boxes for children without expecting recognition, and who thanked me for sharing a simple sandwich." Ethan felt an unexpected sense of relief settle over him. For weeks, he had worried that revealing the truth would erase everything they had built together. Instead, Grace had reminded him of the lesson he had been searching for all along. It had never been about pretending to be someone else forever. It had been about discovering who would value the person beneath every title and every achievement. Around them, the ballroom remained unusually quiet. Many of the guests reflected on their own choices during the experiment. Some approached Ethan afterward to congratulate him, while others politely admitted they wished they had looked beyond first impressions. Ethan welcomed every conversation with kindness because his goal had never been to embarrass anyone. Before the evening ended, the event coordinator invited Ethan to say a few final words. Standing once again before the audience, he smiled warmly. "This experience taught me something I should have understood years ago. Success can open many doors, but character is what determines who chooses to walk through them with you. Every person deserves to be seen with dignity before being judged by appearances, because circumstances can change much faster than values." His words were met with sincere applause. After the event, Grace and Ethan stepped outside together into the cool New York evening. The city lights reflected across the sidewalks after a brief afternoon rain. Parked nearby waited the luxury sedan Ethan had left behind weeks earlier. Grace looked at it for a second before laughing softly. "I have to admit, I was expecting the subway again." Ethan laughed with her. "Honestly, I miss those walks more than I expected." Instead of driving to an exclusive restaurant, Ethan asked whether she would like to return to the same little bookstore where they had first met. Grace smiled immediately. "That sounds perfect." They spent the next hour walking through familiar aisles, talking about books, family, and dreams for the future. Before leaving, Ethan opened the glove compartment of his car and carefully removed the novel Grace had given him weeks earlier. The pages had become slightly worn from being read more than once. He handed it back with quiet gratitude. "This was the most valuable gift I received during the entire experiment," he said. Grace gently pushed the book back toward him. "Then keep it," she replied. "Every good story deserves to remind us where it began." Several months later, Brooks Technologies announced a new nationwide scholarship program supporting students from families facing financial hardship, inspired by the volunteer event, where Ethan had first seen Grace's compassionate heart. Grace continued teaching because she loved helping children believe in themselves. Ethan often visited her classroom, not as a billionaire seeking attention, but as someone reading stories to students who dreamed about their own futures. Their relationship grew slowly, built on trust instead of appearances, shared values instead of wealth, and kindness instead of status. Looking back, Ethan realized the greatest discovery of his life had never been finding someone who loved a billionaire. It was finding someone who had already cared for an ordinary man before she ever knew he was one.